A large percent of the American public is concerned about a civil war, and that's what happens here. So in this scenario, what happened, the message draft we just saw today was more election violence. Some of it's over the Democratic proposal for an AR ban, which millions of Americans just will not accept. There's demonstrations and counter demonstrations. And the problem with counter demonstrations is that tends to get more violent. So that starts heating up in the election scenario. And there were some other message items there with, some groups forming and then counter groups form against them, and things just kind of to get nastier, and violence just started breaking out there. And, and a lot of us, have experienced it in our families. That's why this message item, I thought, from Tim Pool, a leading libertarian podcaster, was kind of a neat one. And I see this in my family, and I have tons of friends that say the same thing, that their families are really divided. You got Trump, absolute fanatics, absolutely love him, and you've got that within families. So we had this message item here where Tim Pool talks about it, and again compares it to the original U.S. Civil War, where families in some cases literally split up to go fight against each other.
Yeah. And so you've been on the Tim Pool show, have you not?
Yes, I've been on several times. It's interesting. Tim Pool he's a libertarian, but he's also, I would say, he's a prepper. He covers threats a lot that could cause a collapse, and the need to prepare for it. And it's kind of funny because I've seen a lot of videos produced condemning Tim Pool for talking about collapse threats and having preppers on his show. And to me, it kind of illustrates another divide in our country. Libertarians, we generally, I'm pretty much a libertarian. Libertarians tend not to trust the government. It's not that I think the government is full of evil people. They're not. But we realize that government can't help you in a collapse, and you need to be able to do stuff on your own. On the other hand, a lot of left-leaning, very liberal Democrats are just the opposite. They want people to be dependent on government. They want you to trust in your government and assume the government will always take care of you. And that's not what libertarians and preppers believe. And there's a good example of this on your app. In May, I remember you sent out a threat alert on the solar flare. There was big solar flare activity, and a government agency reported on, hey, there's a big risk of a damaging solar flare, but there was no official government warning put out because, again, the politicians, elected officials, the bureaucrats want all the people to just trust that government will take care of you. Well, the app put out a warning, not from a government source, but from an expert on the grid, that there was about a 10% chance, it was the best estimate of his estimate was a 10% chance that our grid could go down from that solar flare in May. And there was a little bit of damage, it didn't go down. But the alert went out on the Collapse Survivor app telling people, hey, it's unlikely, but there is a 10% risk of damage to the grid. And if the grid goes down, if there's a big solar event, if there's an EMP attack from a nuclear weapon, electromagnetic pulse, government studies, congressionally funded studies from experts have concluded that 90% of the population could die. So if there's a 10% chance of the grid going down, the government should have put out an alert on it, but they didn't because they want people to just trust, oh, nothing to worry about, government will take care of you. Well, the app reported on it, and Tim Pool covered the solar flare risk on his show. He had David Tice, a producer, who put out the fantastic documentary everyone should watch. It's called Grid Down, Power Up. It cites that 90% of Americans could die statistic in it, explains how vulnerable our grid is. Well, people need to know about that. So you need an app, and then you need people like Tim Pool warning about threats, because the government will not. The government wants you to be dependent, trust in the government. They'll take care of you, even though preppers know that that's just not the case.
There are a lot of situations that will happen like that, where if there's a 10% chance of something happening and like causing some real big damage, you're not really going to hear about it. The overseers are not necessarily, trying to volunteer that information that much. So
I think they don't want to elicit unnecessary panic unless they're like really sure, because if they start sending out alerts on their own and everyone starts panicking, everyone gets very mad very quickly at them, and they're trying to keep everyone happy. So I think they're trying to be very strategic and careful about alerting the population about real threats. And I understand that, but also when there is a real threat and they're too hesitant on the trigger, that can be life-threatening. So the app is a very good workaround for that, in my opinion, having an outside source to alert us of disaster where the government can't, because it would elicit so much panic, you know. I'm actually a fan of Tim Pool myself. I've been following him since, I would say, maybe 2018, 2017. And something that I really like about him is he's very pragmatic, and he doesn't get very emotionally worked up and stirred very easily. And even when he does get very emotionally stirred, it's not explosive or like ugly. He has a very good groundedness about him, and doesn't like to just, you know, say things all willy-nilly. He's very deliberate in what he says, and I really appreciate that about him, because I think that it's a good, valuable resource that a lot of people could look at, being in the looking to the thought community, like podcasters, for information. It's really innovative, where there's a lot of censorship in like our normal news rotations. The podcasters come in and fill in those gaps. So I really enjoy the Tim Pool show.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And he was in the media before he founded his show. He was a reporter. And I think he just got fed up because, you know, the media is so dependent on the government for information. They tend to be just, you know, cheerleaders for the government a lot. And I think he just got a little bit fed up with the, you know, the lack of honest reporting. So went off and produced his own show. And then, you know, on some issues, yeah, he's got a point of view, but most of the time when you go on a show, it doesn't matter that I'm a prepper. When I went on the show, he will challenge everyone on his show. He'll question you, and you know, he's very analytical, gets into the issues, doesn't take sides, and when he sees a bias, you know, he'll go after you on that. All his guests, and that's one reason it is kind of fun to watch, because you know, anyone on that show can go in and grill. And they said, I've been on it twice, and yeah, I get grilled on that show. You get challenged. It's kind of fun.
And that's good journalism, quite frankly, in my opinion.